All right, guys, this will be the Week 5 recap video. Before I get into this, I wanted to address the 2 trades that happened today. I will be making videos on those, and those should be coming out tonight. But I'm going to film this one and edit this one and get it up, and then I'll go ahead and attack those 2. So those will probably be out relatively late tonight. But this video I've been pretty excited for. We had a pretty exciting Week 5, and I think Week 6 has the largest implications so far up to this point in the season. So with that being said, we'll go ahead and get into it. The GOAT and the WOAT. The GOAT this week was my team again, back-to-back weeks, another 170-point week. This was supposed to be a down week for my team. I had to start Rico Dowdle and Kendrick Bourne. I had a bye and an injury, but those guys combined for 58 points. So those 2 additions combined with some other good performances from my players led to a high-scoring week for me. And then on Grayson's side, pretty much for Grayson, the case was this was just a floor week for every single player in Grayson's lineup. So not super worried about that, just bad timing for all players to have rough games. Looking at the matchup results here, we already kind of touched on my team, but I took down Kluss this week. This was Kluss's best week of the season so far. Deebo Samuel looks to be like a legit fantasy option this year. He's getting design plays, and it seems like the Commanders in general are being a bit more conservative, not throwing as many deep balls this year. But Baker Mayfield, kind of a legacy game for him in real life, and just continuing to put up numbers for fantasy. Moving on to that next matchup, again, touched on Grayson already, but for Joe, this was a solid week, scoring 130. That's where you want to be at week to week. And Jamar Chase scraped out some points there with Jake Browning at the end of the game at halftime. I think Jake Browning actually had negative points, but came out with 2 touchdowns to Jamar and ended up putting up a solid week for Joe. Moving into that next matchup, this matchup was pretty close the entire week. Javonte Williams had a great game for Tim, but Tim unfortunately loses Amarian Hampton to the IR, so that could play a role into Tim's upcoming games. Not quite sure how long Amarian Hampton's going to be out, but we know at least 4 games so far. And then greatest ever, this was a tough loss for him. He had Ramondre Stevenson that gave him a fighting chance, but just not enough to beat out Tim. And Jake Ferguson, I touched on him a little bit in the first Third Themes video, but he's having a fantastic year. And that next matchup between Maggie Kitchens and Colt hung around pretty well in this one, 130 points. It's a solid week, but kind of seemed like Cal had the edge for most of this matchup. It wasn't a blowout by any means, but for Colt's team, Jalen Waddle looks like he's going to be a pretty solid piece with Tyreek Hill out. And then for Cal, CJ Stroud kind of had a revenge game, not necessarily just against the Ravens, but just on the league. He's gotten a lot of heat in the media for having a rough start to the year, but a 4-touchdown day for him against the Ravens. So great showing there for Cal's team. And then that last matchup, this was I don't even know, deja vu, I guess, for me. But Kerr ends up taking down Alex in the trade game. These 2 had that massive trade this past week, but Travis Kelce catches a garbage time check down that literally gave the Chiefs 0 chance to win the game. And it gave me flashbacks to when Alex beat me like 5 years ago on an Alvin Kamara check down from Drew Brees. That was just basically a forfeit from Drew Brees, but that was a great game. Jonathan Taylor, the piece Alex traded for, 3 touchdowns, looked great. Honestly, both managers should be pretty happy with how their teams performed in this matchup. So, going into the standings overview, points for gap is starting to spread a little bit, especially there at the top. However, the records at the top are still pretty close. I will say the bottom is getting pretty crowded down there. 3, 1, and 4 teams. That's pretty rough, man. Like I said, you really can only lose 6 games if you're going to want to make the playoffs, especially if the top of the league is pretty tight. So if there were teams that were pulling away, like if there were a couple 5-0 teams in the 4-1 team or something like that, then that bottom playoff spot might be able to be squeaked into with a 500 record or maybe even a 6-8 record. But as long as it stays pretty tight like this, I don't see. We're gonna have to see a big run out of those guys at the bottom to make the playoffs. And honestly, not even playoffs at this point. These guys might be fighting to avoid last place down there. Looking at the waiver results, this is actually the first week where I think there was just a ton of moves that are worth talking about here. And just a theme I saw with this waiver wire was managers kind of giving up on big name players that haven't been playing well. Like a couple guys that just come to mind are Jerry Jeudy and Keon Coleman. And then a couple other guys that I was surprised about getting drafted were Juwan Johnson and Alec Ayumaner. I think those guys will still be fantasy relevant, but Mark Andrews also dropped there. But also a couple good pickups as well. Hassan Haskins and Kamani Vidal. If one of those guys takes over for the Chargers, could be pretty good snags. Romeo Doubs, I've touched on him a lot the past couple of weeks. And then also the Packers defense. I believe they have the Bengals this week, so that should be a just absolute feast for Micah Parsons and the Packers defense. So honestly, a few actually solid moves in the waiver wire to discuss. And then the upcoming matchups, I did remember to update the faces this time, but honestly, this is like the best slate of matchups that ESPN could have cooked up, in my opinion here. So if you take a look at these matchups, there can be 6 teams that come out of this week at 4-2. That would be absolutely insane, and it really make things completely wide open. And then the one matchup that doesn't have that factor in it is the 2 1-4 teams facing off between Sam and Colt, and that's also a massive game because the loser of that game could be the sole proprietor of last place. So I'm very excited for this week of fantasy, and I think there's a lot of storylines and a lot of things to watch here. So that's all I have for this recap video. I'm going to go ahead and start working on those 2 trade videos. So that's all I have, and thank you guys.